Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to really cut through the noise and pull out the most critical intelligence we're seeing in the pages of Addis Fortune.
That's right. We're digging into 3 major friction points from the paper this week.
And what's interesting is they all reveal this consistent theme. It's this dramatic tension between Ethiopia's grand national ambitions, modernization, green energy, and the challenging realities on the ground.
Exactly. The implementation and infrastructure challenges.
Yeah.
We've got a stack of stories that when you connect them, they paint a really clear picture.
So what are we covering?
We'll be looking at everything from the just wild prices for a square meter of land in the capital to the national push for electric vehicles that's getting short-circuited by its own tax policy.
Right. And finally, the budget crisis it's crippling major teaching hospitals.
It's a study in aggressive policy meeting these really complex infrastructural bottlenecks.
Let's start with where every economy begins. Land, specifically the latest land lease auctions in Addis Ababa. They just continue to defy any attempt at stabilization.
It's a truly high-stakes market. I mean, we are seeing just extreme speculative pressure.
Okay, let's unpack this. The latest auction saw, a nearly 48% jump in the average offer for a square meter?
A 48% jump. That kind of volatility, it just signals that land is being treated purely as a financial asset.
Not for immediate development, it's for future appreciation.
Absolutely. And the data from this 7th round is just astounding. You had Addis Fenta setting a new record, committing 135,000 birr per square meter.
And that was for a tiny plot, right?
A very small 100 square meter plot in Galil district. I mean, to put that 135,000 birr figure into perspective, we're talking about prices that are completely out of reach for your typical resident or small business.
So land acquisition becomes what? An elite pursuit or just a speculative gamble?
Pretty much.
And one of the most counterintuitive trends the newspaper highlighted was that the smaller the plot, the higher the unit price.
Right, which sounds backwards.
It does. We saw a 96 square meter plot in Kolfik Kurinyo go for 125,000 birr per square meter. The logic, which is frankly a bit depressing, is that the smaller total size makes the final bill just a little more manageable for the, quote, middle-class bidder.
But they're paying a huge premium on every single square meter. They're betting on being able to hold it and then flip it.
Exactly. And you can compare that to the largest plot in the same area, a 902 square meter parcel, which went for a much, much lower 25,000 birr per square meter.
That price compression really shows you something. The serious developers, the ones buying for scale, they are far less willing to inflate that cost. It's a more realistic valuation for actual construction.
So the city recognizes this problem. Land being leased for very little and then resold immediately for a massive profit. And they're trying to curb it by requiring full upfront payment.
That's the policy lever they're pulling. And you have to ask, does it actually solve the core problem of access?
Well, what does the paper say?
Addis, a seasoned figure in real estate, points out that while prices have stabilized a bit, they're still fundamentally unaffordable for most people.
So the upfront payment requirement, it might deter some speculators.
It does, but it also restricts genuine end users who, they rely on that financing flexibility.
So the policy solution is trying to stabilize prices by removing financing options. But in doing so, it just makes the core problem of access even worse for legitimate buyers.
That's the tension, exactly. And Addis warns that all these frequent policy changes are eroding bidder confidence.
Which pushes potential builders away from plots and towards the relative safety of condominiums.
Right. The city's focus is clear, but the implementation is just producing all these unintended consequences.
So if unstable infrastructure and policy affect physical assets like land, let's see how that same tension affects a major modernization effort. I'm talking about the national push for electric vehicles.
Oh, this is a big one. The Ministry of Transport and Logistics has set some incredibly ambitious targets.
Transformative, really.
They are. Ethiopia spent, $2.5 billion on fuel imports last year?
Wow.
The national ambition is to slash that bill, clean up the air fossil fuel smog accounts for nearly 78% of pollution in Addis Ababa, and get over 150,000 battery-powered vehicles on the road by 2030.
And the numbers suggest there's some real momentum. Transport officials are claiming registrations jumped from 7,000 in 2022 to 115,000 this year.
It's a massive jump.
And they're saying 60% of new vehicles sold in 2024 reportedly have no tailpipe. That is rapid market adoption.
It is, but that kind of rapid adoption reveals these critical gaps in infrastructure and, the user experience.
Let's talk about that.
Well, let's just look at the tangible struggles of early adopters. The experiences at the Michu Corner charging station are a perfect example.
Okay.
An EV owner, Ayub Lajiz, he describes waiting nearly an hour just to charge his vehicle. It costs him around 900 birr.
But the bigger issue is the anxiety, right?
It's a deep charging anxiety. He still relies on his older petrol car for any serious trip outside the city because he just can't count on finding a charger.
And it gets worse than anxiety. He can't even reliably charge at home because the power capacity is too low, his cables overheat, the basic infrastructure just isn't there yet.
And that's just the user side. If you look at it from the operator's perspective, the challenges are immense.
Like the guy running the charging station.
Exactly. Tesfaye Adugna, who runs Michu Corner, he's dealing with burnt cables, frequent power outages that force him to use expensive diesel generators.
A diesel generator to power an electric car charger. The irony.
I know. And he has unclear electricity billing that lumps together the charging power with the power for his restaurant and even a decorative fountain. It's a mess.
This raises a critical question. We saw in the paper, Ephraim Tesfaye's calculations show that installing just 2 fast chargers costs around 15 million birr.
An immense upfront cost.
So if the cost is that high, and user fees have to be high to recoup it, doesn't the EV transition just become a luxury item? Doesn't that defeat the whole purpose?
It absolutely does. And the problem is compounded by a paradoxical tax structure.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
The policy basically pits the ambition for local manufacturing against the reality of cheap imports.
We've seen local manufacturers sounding the alarm on this. Melkamu Wasefa of Marathon Motor and Simiriab Sirkabirhan of FB Automotive.
They are. They're saying the tax system favors foreign finished products over their own domestic assembly.
How does that work?
It's simple, really. Importers bring in a fully finished EV and pay only 5% customs duty.
Go.
Meanwhile, the local assemblers, the very people trying to build the domestic capacity the government says it wants, they get penalized. They pay 8 to 10% duty on the bare car bodies and components they need to assemble a car locally.
So the government is effectively making it more profitable to ship a finished car from overseas than to build one in Ethiopia.
It is a massive friction point. Melkamu warned that if this isn't corrected, companies will have no choice. They'll have to abandon local manufacturing entirely and just become importers to survive.
Which completely undermines the entire technological transfer goal of the strategy.
Utterly.
Okay, let's shift our focus to structural economic reforms. If instability affects physical assets and energy policy, let's see how regulatory change is impacting the intangible side. Trade and finance.
And this brings us to a monumental change in the oilseeds and pulses trade. The government is trying to overhaul decades of, let's say, opaque trade practices.
Right. The new directive that mandates all payments between exporters and suppliers must now flow through the Ethiopian Commodity Exchange, the ECX.
This is a massive upheaval for the sector.
The Ministry of Trade says the goal is clear: increase transparency, combat tax evasion, prevent market manipulation.
And they levy a tiny 0.02% fee and record everything. On paper, it sounds like a good modernizing regulation. But for many experienced exporters, it's just a bureaucratic headache. And the most crucial pain point, the one that's really devastating the supply chain, is the outright prohibition of advance payment.
Why is that ban on advance payments so critical?
Because for suppliers like Tiggy Isma, those advances were the only credit they had. They relied on that upfront cash from the exporter, a relationship built on trust to finance collecting and storing goods in rural areas.
And now that's gone.
It's gone. The government has eliminated the functional informal credit mechanism that propped up rural trade for decades. Now they face these immediate cash flow problems because payment only comes after the ECX transaction is complete.
So again, stability is being introduced by a mandate, but it comes at the cost of eliminating the flexible financing that the actual suppliers need to operate.
Exactly. The banking system just isn't ready to fill that credit gap. It's creating enormous disruption.
Shifting gears a bit, but on the same theme of finance, what about innovation? The National Bank of Ethiopia is introducing a regulatory sandbox for fintech.
Right. The NBE. They're trying to spur innovation to hit that national financial inclusion strategy goal. They want 70% of adults with formal accounts by 2026.
And they want truly transformative products. There's a 300,000 birr application fee and a 12-month test period.
It's a necessary move, but the NBE immediately put up some walls.
Gotcha.
They explicitly excluded crypto products. Despite real interest from innovators like Pay, the NBE is citing volatility risks.
Is that a wise move?
While some former NBE advisors see the caution as wise, but they strongly argue that innovation has to use robust tech like blockchain for secure records and, most critically, for better remittance services.
Which are a lifeline for the economy.
A huge lifeline. And the urgency for this kind of digital innovation is maybe best shown by the state of the insurance industry.
Its penetration is dismal, right? It's like 0.3% of GDP.
It's tiny. And here's the kicker. The sources note that distribution costs are currently consuming up to 60% of the total service costs.
60%? What?
Because of the reliance on physical branches and paper processes, this just perfectly illustrates why digital solutions, the kind the NBE's sandbox is supposed to foster, are so vital. They have to find ways to slash that delivery cost.
Finally, we have to turn to the human cost of this gap between policy and implementation. We're talking about the social strain, which is crystal clear in the country's teaching hospitals.
They're facing what you could call a functional collapse, and it's due to systemic underfunding.
A direct crisis from an outdated funding model.
Exactly. These large teaching hospitals, they're tied to university budgets. They get this minuscule allocation, only about 2% of the budget, and it's categorized under this vague community service heading.
That structural setup means hospital services just aren't a priority. They can't be run as revenue centers.
And the consequences are terrifying. You have CT scanners and X-ray machines broken for months on end.
Chronic shortages of essential medicines, even anesthesia.
Which critically impacts patient safety and the quality of training for new doctors. Staff are burnt out, they're getting irregular overtime payments. It's a breaking point.
And they're essentially trapped in this system.
They're completely trapped. Ministry of Health regulations bar them from raising fees or generating substantial income to cover their own rising costs.
But leaders are starting to recognize this policy trap, aren't they?
They are. Minister of Education Berhanu Nega and Solomon Abraha are publicly calling for hospitals to get independent budgeting. They're suggesting centers in cities like Bahir Dar need 35 to 40% of the university's budget, not 2%.
And this systemic failure, it just cascades down to other critical services like rehabilitation centers.
Which members of parliament recently called ownerless. There's no clear ownership or funding priority.
And demand has surged because of conflict across the country.
Dramatically. It's leading to these overwhelming waiting times. You're seeing patients forced to wait anywhere from 12 to 40 days for necessary treatment in places like Desi and Bahir Dar.
And we saw that story of Markan Temesgen, who had to pay 30,000 birr at a private hospital for his brother's care.
A treatment that would have cost less than 10,000 birr at a functional public rehab center. That's the direct financial burden on families when institutions fail.
So what's causing this collapse in the centers?
It's a combination of things. Staff shortages, the high cost of imported materials, and, critically, the termination of vital donor funds that used to prop many of them up.
If we connect all this to the bigger picture, whether we're talking about land speculation, the EV charging network, trade financing, or the healthcare crisis.
It's all the same story. Ethiopia is navigating this immense gap. The policy targets are aggressive, they're aspirational, but the on-the-ground capacity, the tax consistency, the stable, modern infrastructure needed to meet them, it's just not there yet.
So the pattern is a national growth strategy being constantly undercut by the instability of its own implementation.
That's it in a nutshell.
And we see this recurring tension. Well-intentioned policies designed for transparency and stability often inadvertently remove the financial flexibility and trust-based credit that businesses and essential services really need to function. Which brings us to our final thought for you to consider. If you look at the difficulty in implementing full upfront payments for land to deter speculators, and then you look at the constraints on advance payments in the ECX system, what is the overall effect of this systemic removal of credit and flexible financing on the growth potential of genuine non-speculative businesses across the entire Ethiopian economy?
A critical question for the nation's financial future, no doubt.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the latest developments covered by Addis Fortune. We'll be back soon with more critical analysis. Goodbye for now.